what are the potential benefits of using regenerative medicine compared to, and I want to say traditional treatments, but also just traditional approaches? It's not necessarily, it's the wait and see approach sometimes as well,
So I think the biggest difference with regenerative medicine, it's a bit what I touched on previously. So with traditional treatments, all you really are doing is symptomatic management.
Plastering over the damp in the corner.
Exactly. And sometimes that plaster is enough to break an inflammation cycle and the horses totally come out of it, and then you don't need any further intervention. But I think what we're asking sports horses to do these days, it's a different level to what horses, generally speaking, were biologically designed to do. You have the best of the best of the best horses. I was listening to a really interesting talk by Ludger Bierbaum, and we've actually done quite a bit of work with him and his vet. And the best of the best of the best horses, from like a genetics point of view, are so strong that they often don't need intervention. But that's the exception. That's the most elite of elite of elite athletes. And for most of the rest of our horses
like
they need a little bit of help along the way. Those are the horses that go jump 5 Longines Global Champions classes, have 2 days off and get to do it all over again. But again, that's the exception to the rule. So with traditional treatments, we've gone from sort of symptomatic management to actually fixing the problem with regenerative medicine treatments. So as I mentioned earlier, there sort of are two groups. You've got your group of treatments that control inflammation. And if you look, these days at horses that have laminitis that, you can't use cortisone on, or you're very cautious about triggering or something flaring up again, I think regenerative medicine has got a very legitimate use. I think also because you're addressing the problem more at the source. So if you're looking at like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory or cortisone for an inflamed joint, it sort of works through, the technical term is you're interfering with the cyclooxygenase of what's happening in that joint. But a more, in my opinion, targeted way is using something like IRAP that actually blocks those receptors. So you tend to get a much more durable response for longer, and you have better long-term outcomes. I think
it's also taking all of those inflammatory processes out just prevents further degradation.
Exactly. So I think with something like IRAP, I think people often are under the illusion that it's regenerative. If there's any regenerative effect you get, it's a fact of the body being able to normalize and do a little bit more because you've removed the inflammation. IRAP in and of itself, there's very little regenerative power. But your things that control inflammation, IRAP, A2M, Prostride to some extent, cortisone, the horse looks better in a week's time or a few days' time, but you're not developing a fundamentally stronger, better structure.
That's great. That's a lovely difference.
If you look at something like PRP, Regenesis, again, Prostride to some extent, that's a bit of a hybrid. Your horse isn't going to look, if it's lame, better in a week's time, but in 2-3 months' time, you're going to have a totally different tendon, you're going to have a totally different structure, if you have enough threshold platelets and all these different problems with these treatments, but you're going to end up with a much improved structure or joint. So in my opinion, from what we see and from what the research says, I think the best possible protocol you can have is first and foremost getting the inflammation under control. I'm a big proponent of regenerative medicine, so using something like IRAP. And then once that inflammation is under control, following up with something regenerative that's actually going to improve whatever underlying weakness you have.
So it's not a one, like you were saying earlier on, it's not this is the best one. It's what's best for the injury and the horse.
Exactly. Okay. And for instance, like quite interestingly, we do a lot of work in the Middle East, both with the racehorses, and there's a huge endurance market there. And IRAP historically has only really been used in joints. And now what they've started doing is combining IRAP and shockwave in tendon injuries.
That is really
And they're getting
interesting.
really, really good results. So obviously we'll follow it up with something like PRP or Regenesis or something like that. But injury generally has an inflammatory component to start off with. And I think, we've got such good vets in this country. The best place to be guided is by your vet for your horse. I don't think regenerative medicine is entirely necessary in every case as the first line of defense, depending on what's happening and what your goals are. You know, if you've got a horse that's a little bit older, its joints just flared up, and you need a jump in 2 weeks' time, provided the cortisone or whatever that your vet wants to use has an appropriate withdrawal, in my opinion, the most guaranteed way you're going to have to get that horse jumping sound in 2 weeks' time is most likely